Okay, welcome everybody to class number 10, Understanding Judaism, the Basics of Deed and Creed. We are learning in the merit of a full recovery for our friend Aviva Galia Basima, and we are also learning in the merit of the memory of our friend Sheila Slezak, whose son and two of her children are here with us tonight, and Sheila always loved studying, so it's an honor to have them studying with us tonight. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter introduction because we had a little video glitch, so the live class is about 10 minutes ahead of where you are. But to catch us up very quickly, we're going to talk about the three exceptions to thou shalt not kill. The first exception is if someone comes to rob your home at night and they think you'll be home, and if you're home, you're going to you're going to defend your property. So if someone came to rob your house at night, they were prepared to kill you. And in a case where someone's prepared to kill you, you must slay them first. If they came to your home to rob it during the day when they thought you might be out or weren't prepared to encounter you, they just came to steal. They weren't willing to kill you. So the Talmud says, if it's clear that they were going to kill you, you kill them first, whether it's day or night. And if they were trying to sneak in and they weren't prepared to kill you if you came to defend your property, then obviously you can't kill them. So we get into the second case of the second exception of when you can kill, or maybe it's not an exception, you can't murder, but you can, in certain circumstances, kill. And the first case of that is when someone comes and may be coming to kill you. The second example of that is told over in the story of Moses, when he became mature and he was an adult, and he saw one of his brethren suffering in Egypt. He killed the Egyptian. And you could say, well, Moses is later going to come and tell us that in God's name that you can't murder. So how did Moses murder? Well, it's not that you can't murder. And the question is asked, why then is Moses never held to task for violating the commandment that prohibits killing? Because neither Moses nor God ever taught that it is illegal to cause death in any situation. That would, in fact, be the law if the Torah had actually written, thou shalt not kill. But it doesn't. In Hebrew, do not kill would have required the phrase lo taharog. Hereg implies killing in every conceivable case. What God said at Sinai, as we learned when we talked about the 10 Commandments or the 10 Principles, is lo tirza, which properly translated means thou shalt not murder. And the difference between killing and murder is that the murder refers only to forbidden slayings, and what is forbidden is made clear by Jewish law. Murder is the slaying of the innocent. Self-defense is not included in its parameters, nor is the defense of another human being who is about to be senselessly slain, and those whose death must be prevented at all costs. So when Moses saw someone harming somebody else, he was exhibiting the fact that there is a self-defense exception to the do not kill law, which is really do not murder, and the logical extension of self-defense, since we are responsible for each other, that if someone is coming to harm an innocent person, we actually have an obligation to stop the person about to do the slaying. And the third example relates very much to our world today. In every class, I try to make it contextually relevant to us. Sometimes that's challenging, and sometimes I don't even have to work at it. It comes just by reading the text, which we will do. If I may kill in self-defense or in defense of another, how much more so if the other who is endangered is not one, but many, not a person, but rather the totality of the Jewish people. The Talmud is clear that not only is war at times permissible, but it may in fact deserve the designation as milchemet mitzvah, a war noble enough to become a divine command. War can represent the collective expression of the Jewish people prepared to fulfill the command, he who comes to slay you, you must slay him first. Now, I'm going to play a quick song. We have two songs in tonight's in tonight's class. And the first song comes from Pete Seeger. Actually, it doesn't come from Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger sang it in 1958. It actually comes from Kohelet, which was written by King Solomon, and Pete Seeger borrowed from that song. And I'll just play a snippet of that song for you.
For a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, to everything turn.
So Pete Seeger says, quoting Kohelet, there is a time for war. And the Jewish people are a people of peace. If you follow the Jewish prayers every day of the week, the word shalom, which means hello and goodbye, also means peace. And we pray for peace throughout the prayers. So it seems like it would be strange that there would be a commandment to have a war. So he writes, yet we make a grievous error if we assume that peace means Neville Chamberlain's peace at all costs. Judaism is realistic enough to understand that we must love and pursue peace to such an extent that we are even prepared to fight for it if necessary. Now, right now, there's a debate going on in Israel where they say we have to make a deal for the hostages. And some people have said we have to make a deal at any cost. And many in Israel are saying, well, many of the people who captured these hostages had been in Israeli prisons, and we gave them up for one soldier who was kidnapped, Gilad Shalit. Thousands of killers were released for Gilad Shalit, for one person. And Israel at the time was operating under the idea of we are going to get our people back, especially a soldier, a teenage boy, 18, 19, at any cost. And unfortunately, Israel, all of us, are suffering the cost of that now. And now maybe it's not at any cost. At any cost, because what we're learning is that at any cost means we're going to let people out of prison who are going to come back and commit the same atrocities many times over. So the at any cost idea, I think, is quite relevant. But some people will say, God is opposed to war. It's not true. When the Jews crossed the Red Sea successfully and witnessed the destructions of the Egyptians, they sang a song of praise to the Almighty. In it, they described God in the following words: "The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name." The greatest command incumbent upon us is to imitate God. The Bible commands us, "Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Leviticus. "Even as I am holy, so must you be holy. The very ways in which I express my holiness are the ways in which you are to act as well." God clothed the naked, and to the beginning of the Bible, God clothed the naked and ends the Bible with an act of kindness, burying the dead. In keeping with our primary obligation to imitate God, we are to clothe the naked and bury the dead as well. So too, if the Lord is described as a, quote, man of war, then we must acknowledge that in the words of Pete Seeger, Kohelet, King Solomon, there is a time for peace and a time for war. General Sherman was right when he claimed war is hell. And that is why the verse beginning with "the Lord is a man of war" concludes with "the Lord is his name." So the question is asked, what's the purpose of repeating God's identity? It is to make clear that although war is a necessary evil at times, the worst thing that might happen to us is that we become insensitive and lose our commitment to compassion and mercy. God, as we have indicated in previous classes, has two names, Adonai and Elohim. And those two names represent different aspects of the one God. They're the two roles that he must play in his relationship with us. He is the compassionate Adonai, Lord, the appellation designating the divine quality of mercy. At the same time, he is also, when necessary, Elohim, who is a God concerned with strict justice. And those are two sides of the same God. And when it's our obligation to be holy the same way that God is holy, we also have to reflect that dual nature. Similarly, a parent, right? A parent doesn't want to be strict and harsh on their child, but in a loving way, you must do that because otherwise the child won't learn. The Lord may be a man of war, or better, as the commentator Rashi and other commentators put it, God is a master of war. That is, in charge and in control of the war's outcome. But no matter what occurs, Adonai Shemo, his name, remains Adonai, Lord, sensitive, loving, kind, and compassionate. In a remarkable book published in Israel in the aftermath of this, and remember this book was written some 20 plus years ago, in the aftermath of Israel's Six-Day War, the book was aptly titled The Seventh Day. We read the discussions held by the kibbutzniks following their encounters with killing. What upset them most was their recognition of what even a justifiable need to kill might have done to their psyche. How does one go on after having knowingly taken the life of another human being? How does one continue to be the same loving husband, father, and son as before? To kill may at times be required. To become a killer is anathema to us. Finding the proper balance is the hardest task, but it is implicit in the verse, Hashem is a man of war, Hashem is his name. So that doesn't mean, just, okay, it's war, no limits. It's a war, and that puts on us additional challenges to recognize, as Israel is doing, even in the most challenging of circumstances, to do everything possible, even putting its own soldiers at risk, to prevent unnecessary loss of innocent civilians. And he goes on about all examples. He says, the realization that sometimes even nice Jewish boys have to lift up arms in self-defense and do battle against their oppressor is the key to a major story in the Torah, where a patriarch discovers a principle that changed his name and ours. So quick commercial message that relates to all of this. Jody has made up some shirts with the Israeli flag on it. And when I ski, it's like a jersey. When I ski with it, she's been skiing with it for years. I got one this year. Skiing under the lift, people will yell down at me, Am Yisrael Chai. Right? It's a sign, and we're going to get into what that is. But I just saw that Jody is preparing a new order of these jerseys. So if you want one of those, please get in contact with Jody as soon as possible. So that's going to take us into our next musical interlude, and that is the song Am Yisrael Chai. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to get into the biblical sources for that song. That song became popular in the 1960s by the great Jewish composer Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And if you hear, sometimes we do the Friday night services, we do the Carlebach tunes. So this song of Am Yisrael Chai was composed by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And we will have a quick, this is actually him performing it back in the 1960s. So that's Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach doing Am Yisrael Chai. And we're going to get into the source of that song because, like Pete Seeger, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach didn't write all those words. They came from a biblical source. So this is where it gets really interesting. So hold on and bear with us as we go through this. As we've said in other classes, when we do comparative religion, we're not putting down one religion or another. We're doing it to make a distinction. Rabbi Blech in his book does it in a very sensitive way. I hope I can relay that as sensitively. But we're going to address that core principle that I spoke about in the introduction, although for the video you may have missed that. A core fundamental belief in how we live our lives, in our day-to-day lives, comes from this story, relates to the story of Am Yisrael Chai, relates to the exceptions of when killing is allowed. It all comes together. So Judaism does not live by the code that Christianity does, which is turn the other cheek. That moment became so we're talking about the story in the life of Jacob. And we'll get into that. But that moment became so central to his identity that was responsible for a biblical change of name. In the Bible, a name is far more than an appellation. It bespeaks the very mission and purpose of a human being's life. It captures his or her personality. When a person changes drastically in a way that alters his or her life completely, then we find several occasions where God himself intervenes and proclaims via a name change that we now have before us a new individual. And that happened with Jacob. We mentioned briefly in an earlier class that Jacob, the meaning of Jacob, it comes from the Yaakov. It comes from the word akev, which is heel. And the sages bring down a midrash, a story, that Jacob and Esau, who were in the womb together, and who would later vie for their father's blessing, which was passed down from Abraham's blessing to lead a great nation. These twins, who were very different people, Jacob was conceived first. I don't know how they knew that, but that's what the midrash says. And Esau was born first. So if the blessing went to the firstborn, Esau, even in the womb, struggled and pushed through Jacob to get there first. And the reason Jacob, Yaakov, Akev, heel, has that name is because he was born being trampled on under his brother's heel. And as we learned in last week's class and 2 weeks ago classes, Jacob was a very refined person. He studied the Torah, he lived in the tent, he didn't bother other people. He was a pacifist. He didn't want to fight with anybody. Now, if Esau was, in fact, the firstborn, he would have gotten this historic blessing that would have changed the course of Jewish history, world history, because that blessing that his father gave, which came from the father before Abraham, was that you will lead a great nation. The twins grew up different as day and night. Jacob was righteous. Esau was a hunter, a man of the fields, who would not hesitate to kill not only game, but human beings who might have stood in his way. It says in Genesis, now Isaac loved Esau, the father, loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. Esau was not only a hunter of food, but he sought also to capture the heart of his father. He fooled him completely, as our sages point out, by posing questions of a religious nature as if he were concerned with the correct law. How shall I eat? How shall I bless? Isaac, the father, was blind. And Esau was trying to fool his father that he should be the one that gets the blessing. Yet the text tells us Rebekah loved Jacob. The mother was not taken in by this sham. She knew the truth. Jacob studied constantly, and as the unassuming Yaakov, he was a quiet man dwelling in tents. The time came for Isaac to pass on the blessing that he had received from his father Abraham. To whom should he promise the destiny blessed by God? Isaac was about to make an error that would have had the gravest consequence for all of Jewish history. He wanted to bless Esau instead of Jacob. Jacob, Akev, the heel, the one being stepped upon, was prepared not to say a word. True to his nature, he would have allowed himself to be stepped upon because nice Jewish boys don't fight back. Somehow God will help. Jacob was a believer, and he said, if these are the circumstances, that's, if God meant for me to get it, God would do some miracle and intervene. But I'm not going to fight. I don't want any trouble. Yet his mother, Rebekah, pushed him into action so that the tragedy of undeserved blessing may not be played out. She said, or the Torah says, and Rebekah spoke unto Jacob her son, saying, behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, bring me venison and make me savory food, that I may eat and bless you before the Lord before my death. So Rebekah heard this, that the wrong son, in her view, was going to get the blessing. And she said, dude, Jacob, you got to do something. And he was like, no, I don't want any trouble. I don't want a problem. I don't want to fight. And this is the first part of the story that tells us two instances where women were central, critical to the story of Jewish history, and their actions and their bravery was essential to where we are today. And Rebekah is the first one. She says, go now to the flock and fetch me 2 good goats, and now make them savory food for your father, such that he loves, and thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. So she comes in, she says, I heard what they're up to, it's not good. Let's finagle a way out of this. You do this. And it wasn't Jacob's idea, it wasn't his style. He said, my father will feel me, because he's blind, he'll feel me, and I shall seem to him as a mocker, and I shall bring a curse upon me, and not a blessing. And his mother said to him, upon me be the curse, my son. Only hear my voice and go fetch me them. Don't worry about it. Whatever happens, bad consequences, they're on me. I'll take the fall for this. His mother insisted, so he went. Thus, the blessing that sustains us to this day was uttered by Isaac to Jacob and not to Esau. But it is crucial to remember that Jacob, left to his own initiative, would have let the opportunity pass. And the story doesn't end there. What happens is, Esau finds out that he missed out on this from the time he was born. Before he was born, he was trying to make sure he got that blessing. And then Jacob, who was this innocent guy, snuck in out of character and got it. So as you could imagine, Esau was not a happy camper. And he was someone that hunted and killed, didn't distinguish between animals and humans, he would have killed. So he was prepared now to kill his brother for, in his view, stealing the blessing. So Jacob, who was not a fighter, said, I'm getting out of here. I got the blessing. I want out. I don't want to fight with my brother who's, Jacob was this very well-refined but meek studier who lived in the tent, and his brother was this, tough hunter. And he says, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to take that blessing and get out of town. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing. And Esau said in his heart, let the days of mourning for my father be at hand, then I will slay my brother Jacob. He just wait a little while and kill his brother. See what he got for the stolen blessing. I'll show him. Psychologists tell us there are basically 2 ways in which we can cope with the world. People are divided into 2 major typologies. Those who favor either fight or flight. And Jacob, over and over again, tells us he's a lover, not a fighter, right? So he runs away. He fled so that there would be no encounter with his brother. That is how he came to the house of Laban, his uncle, and that is where he fell in love with Rachel, one of the mothers of the Jewish people. Rachel, of whom the Torah says, and Rachel was of beautiful form and fair to look upon. From the first moment he saw her, Jacob became endowed with almost supernatural strength. Seeing Rachel, and he may have had some vision of who she would be as historically, what her role would be, he became a different person. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and he saw the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. With the newfound strength of a lover hoping to demonstrate his manliness to his beloved, Jacob, the student, the scholar, who had spent his days sitting in the tent, was able to push aside the very stone that all the shepherds could not budge. Just like that. It was for Rachel that Jacob was willing to work for 7 years. It was because of her that the time, quote, seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had for her. So Laban said, you want my daughter in marriage? You're going to have to work for 7 years. And for Jacob, okay, not a problem. And he was so enamored with Rachel, the Torah says that those 7 years flew by. So when the time came, after those 7 years, Laban made a feast. He prepared a wedding. But he did not keep his word. He gave to Jacob Leah, the sister, not Rachel. In the modest behavior of the bedroom, Jacob did not realize the truth until morning. And it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. Now, what does Jacob do in this moment of ultimate betrayal? What violence will he wreak? How much anger will he demonstrate? Will he tear Laban from limb to limb? Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Laban says, it is not so done in our place to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill the week of this one, and we will give you the other also for the service which thou shalt serve me with yet another 7 years. Jacob, what are you thinking? He didn't fight. He didn't demand this. Another 7 years, okay. That's what you say. That was Jacob's personality. You understand why his name was Jacob, Akev, heel. He was willing to be stepped upon. And in making that distinguishing, turning the other cheek, in Judaism, where we don't turn the other cheek, why not? Because that's only inviting the other cheek to get slapped if we turn it. So in Judaism, we do not turn the other cheek. But Jacob, who was a man of peace, okay, another 7 years. That was his nature. He was a heel. He was trampled on. That was who he was. Jacob still had not changed from his days in the womb. His approach was still to fling his arms skyward as if to say, well, what am I going to do? God, and he was a very faith-based person. He said, God, I leave it in your hands. Well, how's that working out for Jacob, right? For 20 years, Jacob worked for Laban. He made his father-in-law a very wealthy man. In the process, he also achieved a measure of security and riches for himself. It is then that he heard the words of Laban's son saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all of his wealth. So in this work, Jacob did acquire some possessions, and Laban's sons were jealous that they didn't get to keep all of that, even though they weren't the ones doing all the work. Jacob feels the envy. He is sensitive to the animosity. It's clearly time for a showdown. How could Laban and his sons begrudge the very man responsible for all of their blessing? So what did Jacob do in the face of Laban's sons? Jacob rose up and set sons and his wives upon the camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his substance, which he had gathered in Padan Aram, to go to Isaac his father unto the land of Canaan. He said, fight or flight, I'm out of here. You guys don't like me? I'm out of here. Yaakov would flee once more. He would leave the site of potential confrontation. There was no point in fighting Lavan and his sons or in attempting to clarify the issue. Yaakov sets to heel, so he fled with all that he had until a moment came when he had to change. And when he changed his ways, then God changed his name. So Jacob flees once again. Flight, never fight. But he's going back to the land of his father, and who's there? His brother, Esau, is there. Returning to Canaan, Jacob knew there was yet one more threat awaiting him. What would his brother do after so many years had passed? Was he still waiting to slay him? Probably. So it says, Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother. The messengers would go bearing gifts, right? Again, he was going to appease his brother. He wasn't going to, remember, the first exception to killing is if someone comes to slay you, you slay them. Don't let yourself be killed. So Jacob says, okay, I'm not going to slay him. That's not my nature. I'm Jacob. I'm not going to kill him. So let me send him gifts. Let me be a diplomat. The messengers would go bearing gifts, hoping to appease Esau. Jacob divides the people that are with him, his wives, flocks, herds, and camels, into two camps. He sends all of them before him. What kind of brave guy is that? Women and children first, right? You face Esau, my brother who wants to kill me. He fears the meeting. Before it takes place, we read of an enigmatic, almost incomprehensible encounter. Quote, and Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day, until the morning. So who was this? Who was this mysterious assailant? The sages disagree on what this biblical story is. Who did he wrestle with? For Maimonides, it was a dream. Freudian insights allow us to comprehend its meaning on a far more profound level. In this dream, the attacker, according to all biblical commentators, was an angelic representation of his brother. You don't need to be Freud to figure that out. Right before they are potentially going to face each other, he has a nightmare. The attacker was his brother. Even if it was a dream, how obvious the interpretation. Jacob feared his brother. The confrontation was imminent. Yet Jacob sought by sending his divided camp ahead of him to prevent war as long as possible. We all know someone that's like against confrontation, no matter what, no matter how many times they've been taught that lesson that sometimes you need to have confrontation. Jacob just refused to learn until this dream, until this incident, whatever it was. In the dream, the two finally came together. In the dream, at long last, Yaakov is forced not only to confront his adversary, but to do battle with him. For Rashi and many others, it was more than a dream. It actually happened. What an angelic representative is, we do not know. But the story, dream or reality, means one and the same thing. This was at last the time when Jacob, the man who until this moment had constantly fled the moments of conflict, controversy, and confrontation, finally recognized, as Pete Seeger said, there comes a time when you can no longer flee. There's a time for war. There's a time to kill. The man who had lived by the credo of flight was now forced to finally acknowledge that there is a time for fight. So who won this wrestling match? Something interesting happens here. It says, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was strained as he wrestled with him. Jacob was left limping. The injury was significant. And in fact, that injury of Jacob leads us to a very interesting law of kosher food. So the vein in his leg was badly injured, and it caused him to limp. And in recognition of that, we do not eat that vein in an animal. The hind legs of an animal have this vein that runs through it. And because of that, Ashkenazic Jews who don't currently know how to devein that animal, so we don't eat that. It's called the gid hanasha, that vein that Jacob injured. We don't know how to devein that animal. We don't eat the back half of the animal, back half of the cow. We don't eat. In reference to this story, Sephardic Jews do have the tradition. They know how to devein the back half of the animal, so they do eat it. And Ashkenazic Jews will eat it too if it's properly deveined under that story. So this is where it's pretty interesting. And he said, I will not let thee go. So Jacob said, I will not let you go except you bless me. So they're in the middle of this wrestling match, and whether it's a dream or not, or whether it's an angel, or whether it's God, whoever Jacob is wrestling with, he's got him down. Even though he got injured, he's got him down. And he says, I'm going to let you go only if you bless me. Indeed, the attacker grants Jacob his wish. And he said unto him, what is your name? And Jacob said, my name is Yaakov, Jacob, the heel. And he said, whoever this other person was, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, Yisrael, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Why bless him and why call him Yisrael? We recognize that word Yisrael, Yisrael Chai. Jacob's name in this dream changed. And we know that someone's name is their essence. Jacob, who until this point had always been the heel, Akev, the heel, from the time he was in the womb, now becomes Yisrael. What does that mean? The name Yisrael refers to someone who has fought for his beliefs, someone who has not simply allowed himself to be stepped upon. Jacob may have suffered a blow, but he won the greater battle, the battle over his passivity. The battle over his unwillingness previously to engage in combat. Jacob won the greatest victory of all, for he finally managed to conquer himself. And that injury he had, Jacob until this point had always been not fight, but flight. He always ran away. With this injury in his leg, he couldn't run away anymore. He learned in this incident that there are times to kill. There are times for war. A new personality deserves a new name. No longer would Jacob say, turn the other cheek, as he did until now. Nor would he refuse to face reality or say, if I believed in God, I'll let him do everything. A Yisrael, not a Jacob, but a Yisrael, fights back because he understands that God helps those who help themselves, is a basic Jewish theology. So in the media, in movies, I think in conventional wisdom, people think that a pious Jew accepts the judgment of God. Whatever God wants, it may not be what I want, but I'll accept that. That's not true. We learn from the story of Jacob, from his name changing to Yisrael. And we'll get into more of what that means. And then we'll get into, I'll get to it in a couple minutes, but this will really it'll pull it all together. The phrase, which God created to do, is explained by the Jerusalem Talmud to imply this idea. God left the world incomplete so that we might play a role in its perfection. God created us to be a partner with God in the act of creation. God will not do it all. As people who believe in God, we don't say, well, if this is what God wants, so be it. That wasn't the idea of creation. The idea of creation was God created a world and then said humans are going to partner with it. You've heard the term tikkun olam, perfecting or repairing the world. That idea of tikkun olam, of repairing the world, is God didn't create the world the way it must be. God created the world, he started it, and then gave it over to us to perfect. If we believe that whatever God wants, it so be it. If we were the Jacob, the heel only, in all circumstances, we wouldn't accomplish anything. We wouldn't do anything. And that's not our mission. One of the first things that, the first mitzvah that a Jewish boy does, or is done to him, is the circumcision. And many people will say, how can you do that? God gave you this perfect baby and now you're changing him? On the 8th day? Why the 8th day? Well, God was giving us the message that I created, but I didn't perfect. And there is a covenant, a bris, a circumcision is a covenant between God and the Jewish people that we have to, from the time we're born, we have to strive to improve the world. Don't think that the world is perfect the way it is. Not in this religion. That's not why we weren't born. We're not angels that were born to just bask in the light of the world. We were born to create, to engage with the world. We were born in the image of God, to be holy like God. God created the world in 6 days. On the 7th day, he rested. 7 days, the creation of the world. When do we do the circumcision? What day? The 8th day. The 7 days of creation, 6 days of creation and 1 day of rest, that was God. And after the 7th day, humanity takes over. We have that covenant with God, the bris, the circumcision. The message of that circumcision is, nothing's perfect. I've given you this world, but I didn't give it to you for you just to sit back and enjoy it. I gave it to you to perfect the world. And that's unique. And in doing so, God was saying, at times we have to have peace, but at times it's necessary to fight to improve the world. The Jews who survived the Holocaust learned all too tragically the lesson of that long night when Jacob remained alone. They were deserted by all the nations of the world, forced to confront the reality that there is a time when the diaspora Jew can no longer have faith in flight. So we fought, we returned to our ancient homeland. Was it simply coincidence, or was it divine fate that in 1948, those who best understood the theological significance of the transition from Yaakov to Yisrael, that they chose to call their land the state of Israel, Yisrael. So when we say, Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives, we are referencing Jacob, but not Jacob. We're referencing Yisrael, that there is a time after you're attacked, after you are the victim of the Holocaust or whatever it may be, that we don't just sit back and say, oh, woe is to me, I don't know why God did this. We have to stand up as Jacob became Yisrael. Am Yisrael Chai. It doesn't say, Shlomo Carlebach didn't sing, Am Jacob Chai, the nation of Jacob lives, because they wouldn't have lived. Am Yisrael Chai, the people who recognize that there is a time for peace, but there is also a time for war. There's a time to love, but there is a time to kill rather than be killed. Am Yisrael, that person, that nation will survive. And that's a critical lesson. Basically, Ronald Reagan wasn't the first to say peace through strength. We are a peace-loving people. We pray for peace constantly. But sometimes, in order to have that peace that we strive after, we have to be Israel. We have to fight back. And the amazing thing is, I want to wrap it up with this. This is not the only time that a patriarch's name was changed. Abraham was initially Abram, and God changed his name to Abraham, signifying that Av, the word Av, father, Avram, now became Avraham, the father of many nations. That the Jewish people under Abraham, his idea was ethical monotheism. He was the first one. And that wasn't just for Jews, that was for the entire world eventually, that everyone should understand. They don't all have to keep Shabbos, but everyone should understand that we have one God. Abraham, when God changed Abraham's name, he said, you shall never again be called Abram, because you shall never retreat to being Avram. The Jewish people will always have that obligation to bring light unto the world. Avraham, to be the father of many nations. So Abraham's name was changed from Abram to Abraham, and he was never referred to as Abram again. But Jacob, who was, the flight rather than fight, his name changes to Yisrael. But subsequently, he is still referred to as Jacob, because when his name was changed, and changed out, as we saw, for good reason, it didn't change his essence, because Jacob, who worked to perfect himself and studied Torah, understood that we are to imitate God. And just as God is Adonai and Elohim, a loving, kind, gentle, forgiving God, at the same time, we say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, the loving God and the strict God, Adonai Echad is one and is a loving God. Jacob was the same. So Jacob, who was Adonai, the loving, merciful, non-fighter, at times was Yisrael, at times was Elohim, the strict God of, as God was a man of war. Yisrael also had that essence to him. And those two conflicting ideas exist in God at once, because God is both strict and loving, but ultimately loving, and is only strict because sometimes you need to be strict to be loving. Jacob too. Jacob was able to go back from being Jacob to Israel, Yisrael, and what we strive for is at the end of time, when Mashiach comes, when there is no long, when everybody recognizes God is one, Yisrael will never have to be Yisrael again, will not have to fight. That is not the ideal. We don't grow up to be warriors. David was a great warrior, but we don't recognize David as a warrior. We don't honor him because he was a warrior. We honor him because he wrote the Psalms. Jacob and Yisrael should ultimately be Jacob when that time comes, when we don't have to be Yisrael, when we don't have to fight. But in order for Am Yisrael Chai, in order for us to live on, we have to understand that there are times when it is necessary to kill, that there are times when war is justified. That's not our ideal. But in order to achieve the goal of peace, as Jacob learned in this story when he became Yisrael, there are some, even if it's against your nature, there are times in the word of Pete Seeger or Kohelet, King Solomon, unfortunately for us, that war is necessary. So it obviously was not hard to contextualize tonight's class. War is not the ideal, but war is sometimes necessary. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you. Thank you. Jay, thank you for saving that, because we would have had a picture of me and no video.